The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said, "Amen, amen, I say to you, whoever does not enter a sheepfold through the gate, but climbs over elsewhere, is a thief and a robber. But whoever enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice, as the shepherd calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has driven out all his own, he walks ahead of them, and the sheep follow him, because they recognize his voice. But they will not follow a stranger. They will run away from him, because they do not recognize the voice of strangers." Although Jesus used this figure of speech, the Pharisees did not realize what he was trying to tell them. So Jesus said again, "Amen, amen, I say to you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. A thief comes only to steal and slaughter and destroy. I came so that they might have life and have it more abundantly." The Gospel of the Lord.
My homily's not there, so I'll just have to wing it. But it's fine. Now, you know, today is the Feast of the Good Shepherd, or the Sunday of the Good Shepherd. And so traditionally in the church, that's a day for promotion of vocations, especially to the priesthood and to the religious life. And it reminds me of back when I was in college. I took one class in the ROTC program, having come from a military family. I thought that would be good. And it was military science, which served to teach me that I was neither cut out for the military nor for science. But it was an interesting course. And at one point, about halfway through the year, they brought in a few recruiters to talk about opportunities should you continue in the ROTC program. And they had a representative from the Navy, one from the Air Force, and one from the Marine Corps. And I recall that the two recruiters for the Air Force and for the Navy were both young recruiters. And so they talked a lot about the opportunities in those services, the opportunities to see the world, to have a lot of benefits for job training, to receive the GI Bill benefits. And then the third recruiter was for the Marine Corps, and he was a much older man, probably close to 60, if not in his 60s. He was an old master sergeant. And so he stood up in front of the class of about 200 to 250, and he just looked at us for like 30 or 40 seconds, which is a little awkward. But as he did that, we all sort of paid attention. And all he said was, "Well, I've looked around and seen all of you eye to eye, and I can say there's only about 3, maybe 4 of you who have what it takes to be a Marine. If you think you're one of those guys or girls, come out and see me." Well, when I went out there, the Navy and the Air Force each had a handful of people around them, and the line was out the door for the Marines. Now, I'm not here to start an argument about which service is superior. We all know that the Coast Guard holds that distinction. But I will say that that recruiter, from his many years of leading young men and from his many years of recruiting young men and women for the Marine Corps, had discovered something. And that is that all of us have that innate desire to do something remarkable with our lives. We don't really strive for mediocrity. And yet that's sort of the world we live in, is one that is calling us to comfort, to ease, and ultimately to mediocrity. But the calling to the priesthood or the religious life is not a natural calling. It's supernatural. This is why a lot of young people get confused about whether or not they're called to the priesthood or to the religious life, because they might have a desire to be married. Almost all of us are called to that, and everyone has a natural desire for marriage. That's something that's deep in our DNA. But the question is not whether or not I would be happy being married, but whether I might be called to something supernatural, something that goes beyond what I'm naturally called to. And that's where we find the priesthood and the religious life. Now, the sacramental marriage of two people is in itself a supernatural calling, because it takes us beyond a natural marriage. It's a marriage that's not just for the procreation of children, but the procreation of saints. The idea that a husband and wife help each other to be saints and bring their children up to be the same. And those of us who are priests and religious wouldn't be here without that vocation, obviously. But there is a supernatural call directly from Christ that is to the priesthood and religious life. He calls us by name. If we look at what happened with the apostles, they're in their ship, doing their nets, being fishermen, and Jesus calls them, and it says that they immediately leave what they're doing and follow him. Well, that doesn't seem natural. If a literary critic were to look at that, he would be like, that's kind of an unbelievable set of circumstances that this man calls them and they follow. But we know that it's a supernatural calling, and that when Christ calls, if we answer that calling, then we're being called to that increasingly supernatural life, that life that is remarkable. And so it's not that unbelievable that these men left their nets, their ordinary life, the life that was comfortable for them that they knew, and followed Christ. There was also a young man in the Gospels who got called and didn't go, and that was the young rich man. And you'll recall, Jesus said, "Sell all that you have, then come follow me." But he didn't get up and leave. He was too attached to his comfortable, mediocre life. And how do we know it's mediocre? Well, the apostles who let everything go and followed Jesus have basilicas and cathedrals and churches named after them. We have their name in the gospel and in the prayers that we say. And the rich young man, we don't even know what his name is. And he and his goods are all dust now. But ultimately, it doesn't even matter if we become famous like the apostles in the church and our name is written in the Gospels or in the prayer books, because ultimately our names are written then in the book of life, because we've done what God called us to do. So it's not a life of comfort and ease, but it's a life that is great and remarkable. This is why Pope Benedict, one of my favorite quotes that you've heard from me before, is when he talked to the young people in 2008 in Madrid and said, "The world promises you comfort, but God didn't create you for comfort, you were created for greatness." And that's where we find that supernatural call to priesthood and to religious life. And because we are doing something supernatural, we are not getting married, and we're going into this lifestyle, we actually are radically available to everyone. So while we give up a wife and family, we don't give up our fatherhood. We're able to be fathers and religious sisters to be mothers to the whole church, and in particular, our parish family. I have a good friend who is a priest in Kentucky, and a couple of the Catholic schools had a field day together. And so you had some kids from his school and some kids from other Catholic schools. And he was competing too, so he was in athletic clothes and looked like one of the dads of one of the young kids. And he heard two kids talking, one from his school and one from another school. And the one child from a different school said, "Well, who's that? Is that somebody's dad?" And the other little girl said, "That's Father Eric. He's everybody's dad." Well, there's a lot of wisdom in that, is that nobody has a claim to him. He doesn't have a natural obligation to a wife and children, so he's able to be radically available to his parish. And so in that way, we follow the Good Shepherd. We follow what Christ is calling us to do, because he says that he doesn't want to do it alone. He wants there to be good pastors, good shepherds across the whole world who can mirror his desire to draw all people to himself, to be the ones who keep the sheep safe and help them to together make it to the kingdom of heaven. And so if you're one of those few people who is called to that, who's called to devote your life in a particular way to what God is calling some of you to be radically available to the church as a whole, then I absolutely recommend that you do talk to me or Father Saunders. Because if it's what you're called to, then it is a radical life, it's a remarkable life, but it's a life that will bring you the deepest and most lasting joy you can imagine.